Have you ever actually stopped to think about how babies learn to talk? I mean, really think about it. The acquisition of a first language is genuinely one of the most incredible, complex, and honestly seemingly miraculous feats of the human mind. We literally all do it, yet the actual mechanics behind how a baby goes from just crying to having a full-blown conversation, it's a massive mystery. So today in this explainer, we are going to demystify exactly how we learn to speak. And to really set the stage for our investigation here, consider this absolute wild statistic. Children are in contact with the language of their environment for 20,000 hours or more by the time they go to school. 20,000 hours. That is just an immense amount of time. And it perfectly sets up the sheer scale of what we're looking at today. Exactly how infants manage to decode all that chaotic noise around them into meaningful human communication. Okay, let's dive into this. On the agenda today, we are going to treat each theory of language acquisition as a different lens for solving the puzzle. We've got first steps in language, imitation and habit formation, the biology of language, learning through social interaction, and finally, we'll unlock the advanced mode, the power of bilingualism. Section 1. First steps in language. So, to solve this mystery, we first have to look at the chronological clues. And the crazy thing is, babies everywhere, literally no matter what language environment they're born into, start with universally predictable milestones. From 0 to 12 months, they're babbling, but their brains are actively performing this incredibly fine auditory discrimination. Like they can easily distinguish between pa and ba. Then, right around 12 to 24 months, boom, we get their first recognizable words, and they hit that 50-word milestone. From 24 to 36 months, they start using what we call telegraphic sentences, creatively combining words to say things like, mommy juice. The sheer magnitude of progress in just 3 years is completely mind-blowing. And the key here is that they aren't just memorizing, they are actively analyzing. There's this brilliant anecdote from the source material about a 36-month-old named Randall. So he had a scrape and asked his mom to take him to the doctor. Quote, so he can dock my little bump. Just perfect child logic, right? He creatively turned the noun doctor into a verb. It absolutely proves that kids are already out there hunting for hidden patterns in the language they're hearing. Which brings us to Section 2, imitation and habit formation. So how are they actually figuring out these patterns? Well, if we look through the behaviourist lens, which was championed by the famous psychologist B.F. Skinner, language is learned purely through imitation, practice, and positive reinforcement. Basically, behaviourists argue that environmental feedback and just raw habit formation are the absolute primary drivers of language acquisition. And you can see this beautifully in action with this quote from a 24-month-old named Cindy. She was playing with some stuffed rabbits, and she says out loud, "He eat carrots, the other one eat carrots. They both eat carrots." It's a perfect piece of evidence for behaviorism. I mean, she sounds exactly like a dedicated student in a foreign language class, actively practicing sentence structures and mimicking what she's heard adults say. But this also brilliantly illustrates the limitation of pure behaviorism. Say a child proudly announces, "I putted the plates on the table." Now, ask yourself, if kids only ever imitate, how do they create words they have literally never ever heard an adult say? There's no way an adult says putted. This is an example of grammatical overgeneralization, and it tells us, for sure, that there is way more to the story here than just mimicking the grown-ups. Section 3, the biology of language. Right, so if it's not purely coming from the environment, could the answer actually be built directly into our biology? Enter the innatist perspective, famously proposed by linguist Noam Chomsky. He argued that children are biologically programmed for language, equipped right from birth with an innate universal grammar. Think of it kind of like a pre-installed biological blueprint. This innate mechanism is supposedly what prevents children from pursuing completely wild, wrong hypotheses about how complex grammar works. You can actually see this internal blueprint at work in this adorable mistake from Randall, now at 33 months. He asks, "Our dogs can wiggle their tails." He knows the word "are" is often used to form a question, so he just plugs it right into the front of the sentence. This is innate structural experimentation. He isn't just copying, he is intuitively testing out the complex rules of asking questions based on that universal grammar. Now, to further cement this innatist argument, researchers point to a landmark 1958 experiment created by Jean Bracot. It's famously known as the WUG test, and it is a fascinating way to prove that kids naturally grasp underlying grammatical rules. What's really interesting about this is how simple the test actually is. A child is shown a picture of an imaginary creature and told, "Here is a wug." Then another one appears, and the researcher says, "Now there are two of them. There are two blank." And even very young children easily and automatically supply the plural wugs. Because the word is completely made up, it proves they couldn't have just memorized a vocabulary word pair. They naturally understand the underlying rule for making plurals and know exactly how to apply it on the fly.
Moving on to Section 4, Learning through Social Interaction.
Okay, so biology and imitation are great, but they still don't give us the whole picture. That brings us to the interactionist perspective, which is heavily linked to developmental psychologists like Vygotsky and Piaget. They argue that language emerges through our cognitive development combined with social interaction, which essentially acts as an invisible scaffold. It's a theory that beautifully balances our innate biological abilities with the massive, undeniable importance of human feedback and thousands of hours of usage-based learning. Take child-directed speech, for example. You know how adults naturally modify the way they talk to babies? We raise our pitch, we repeat things over and over, we use super varied intonation, and we focus heavily on whatever is right there in the immediate environment. Well, this isn't just us being silly with baby talk. It actually provides adapted, highly meaningful input that acts as a hook to help kids focus and learn. So the absolutely crucial point here is that language requires a responsive human connection. Passive exposure, like say just leaving the TV or radio on, completely lacks personal adjustment. Active interaction, on the other hand, provides real one-on-one responses and those all-important comprehension checks. There was actually this famous case study of a child named Jim. He was a hearing child of deaf parents, and he essentially only heard spoken language passively through the television. By age 3, his spoken language was severely delayed. But once he started having actual active interaction with a speaking adult, his skills rapidly caught up. The takeaway? You can't just absorb language from the screen. You literally need that social scaffolding to make it stick. Section 5. The power of bilingualism. All right, now that we have a solid grasp on how a first language is built, let's switch into the advanced mode of our investigation to debunk a few popular myths about children juggling multiple languages. A massive point of confusion usually involves how we actually judge fluency. You see, there is a huge difference between BICS and CALP. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. That's the quick playground fluency that kids pick up pretty fast by just interacting with their peers. But CALP? That is Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. That involves complex academic language, and it takes several years to master. So bilingual kids might sound completely 100% fluent socially, but it's absolutely vital to remember they still need time to master the academic reading and writing side of that second language.
Let's move to how this builds directly into the concept of additive bilingualism. This basically means maintaining and developing the home language at the exact same time a second language is being learned. So often, immigrant parents are given this terrible advice to stop speaking their native language at home to somehow force the school language. But the research clearly shows parents should definitely continue speaking their native language. It boosts long-term cognitive flexibility, rather than forcing a subtractive switch that can actually stunt development and even damage family connections.
Which brings us to our final and, quite frankly, a really provocative thoughts. Knowing that it took 20,000 hours of mimicking, deep biological wiring, and incredibly rich social scaffolding to build your very first language, how will you approach your next one? It's wild to think about. The human brain is just an absolute genius at solving this language puzzle. I really hope this explainer has given you a fresh appreciation for literally every word you speak and leaves you eager to discover even more about the amazing human mind.